All right, welcome to Creekside Book by Book. After a week off, we're back. And tonight we're going to be going over Deuteronomy 15 through 18. And some of these things are that we're going to read are laws that have already been gone over in the previous books. And so, but there are some elements that are fleshed out a little bit more in this second giving of the law, which again is what Deuteronomy means, the second law. And so this is part of the covenant renewal before the people go into the land. And so these are all part of the stipulations of the covenant. And so just jump in, 15 verse 1. At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. However, there need be no poor people among you, for in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you. If only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow these commands I am giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he promised, and you will lend to many nations, but you will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year for canceling debt, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them, and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. So, as we've talked about the Sabbath year and the year of Jubilee. So there's a cycle of forgiving of debts. Every 7 years, the people were supposed to forgive all the debts that the people of Israel may have. And this law is really only for the people of Israel. It is not something that was necessary to foreigners who lived among them. They didn't have to extend this law of canceling debts to the foreigners. It was only to the people, the covenant people of the Israelites. And the promise here is that as the Lord leads them, that he will provide for them as they obey his commands. And so, like, obedience, provision, grace, forgiveness of debt, all of these different things are all kind of tied up together in this law. And part of it is to recognize that the people are receiving a tremendous gift from the Lord as they are inheriting the land. It is not their work. And so, because it is not even their land, it's the Lord's land, then they need to recognize that his commands and his stipulations should dictate how they use the resources that that land produces. And so somebody would go into debt because maybe they had a bad year for their crops and they had to borrow money. And so that was part of the expectation, knowing that this could happen. But it wasn't the goal that people would be poor, and it wasn't the goal in God's design for the people of Israel that people would be poor forever. Debt had a 7-year limit. And so if you borrowed money, there's a warning here as well. If you borrow money in the 6th year and you borrow a significant amount, the person that you are borrowing from has to not have in their heart the idea that they won't get that money back, so they will lend less, but instead to be open-handed with the people. And when we talk about generosity at Creekside. We talk about being open-handed with what the Lord has blessed us with, and being able to and willing to share that with with others, giving as well our regular tithes and offerings, but just being open-handed, recognizing it all comes from God. But when we're tight-fisted, which is such a great picture, because we've all been with children at some point or another, and maybe they grab a hold of something and they won't let it go. And even like maybe like Play-Doh or something, you can like see it's all like coming through their fingers, and they're not even really able to say like, this is mine anymore. They're losing it as they're holding it tighter and tighter and tighter. That's part of the image here, is like when you hold on to something so tight that you think it's yours, the Lord is saying that is a wicked thought. The people of Israel are to be open-handed and generous, and to recognize that nobody is supposed to be poor forever. And so this year of canceling debts is something that is pretty unique. It is also something that we don't know how well the people of Israel actually carried this out. There's a few times where there may have been a year of Jubilee, canceling debts, but even in Isaiah 58, the Lord is speaking through the prophet, talking about fasting. And the fasting that the Lord is calling them to is about releasing people from bondage and debt and any kind of slavery, all these things. And the prophets usually gave a message to the people because they weren't doing the right thing in this regard. And so that there's an indication that they probably weren't very good at keeping this command. And then also during that seventh year, the land isn't supposed to be producing, or they're not supposed to be working the land. And so when they go into the exile in the end of Second Chronicles, the part of the concluding words is that when they were in exile, the land finally got its Sabbath rest. And so if they weren't doing the Sabbath rest, there's a good indicator that they were not doing the year of canceling debts as well. So this is one of the challenges of human nature, is we're not good at these kinds of commands. And so, but one of the reasons why the Lord is saying this is like, there's two things that seem to contrast each other here. It says there need not be any poor among you, but then a little further down in verse 11, he says, for the poor will never cease from the land. And so is God contradicting himself? No, but the goal is not that there might be some poor people, but nobody needs to be chronically poor, is what he's getting at. And so as part of the Sabbath year, and the canceling of debts, there's also the canceling of the freeing of slaves. And that's in verse 12. If any of your people, Hebrew men or women, sell themselves to you and serve you 6 years, in the 7th year, you must let them go free. And when you release them, do not send them away empty-handed. Supply them liberally from your flocks, your threshing floor, and your winepress. Give to them as the Lord your God has blessed you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. That is why I give you this command today. But if your servant says to you, I do not want to leave you, because he loves you and your family and is well off with you, then take an awl and push it through the earlobe into the door, and he will become your servant for life. Do the same for your female servant. Do not consider a hardship to set your servant free, because their service to you these 6 years has been worth twice as much as that of a hired hand, and the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. And so if somebody's debt is significant enough that they know they can never repay you, then the Lord is giving them this stipulation that they can be a servant in your house, a slave for you. But just as nobody is supposed to be chronically poor forever, the same is true here. Nobody is supposed to remain a slave forever, as a way of paying off their debt. And so when that 7th year comes, the master, the person who is the benefactor here, who's bringing the slave on, is not supposed to be grumpy about letting the person go, but they're actually supposed to give them like what we would call in a old school Pentecostal sense a love offering. Like I'm giving, like you came to me in debt, and I'm sending you out blessed with the best produce and wine and olive oil. I'm giving you things that that are gifts for you as you establish your life of freedom. And so the relationship between the master and the slave is one of like, I want the best for you, and when you leave, I want the best for you. But if you don't want to leave because you love they just love the family so much, then there's a stipulation for that as well. And this idea of taking an awl and hammering it to the door through their earlobe, I mean, they're piercing their ear, which sounds super painful. I don't know how people do that. And putting it to the door frame, essentially saying this person is bound to this house and they are now a part of our family. And so that if that is what this person chooses to do, then they are now no longer doing this out of indebtedness, but out of relationship and recognition that this is a family that they want to remain a part of, which is interesting. And so that seventh year, they've got canceling debts, freeing of slaves. Both are very significant parts of Hebrew culture, as they are supposed to remember that they were once slaves, but the Lord set them free. That the land is the Lord's, and they are all basically tenants of the Lord's land. But then also there's another reminder about how to handle firstborn animals, because every firstborn, as we read about in Leviticus, every firstborn is from the Lord, and they are owed back to the Lord. And so there are sacrifices that you're supposed to do with firstborn animals. In verse 19, set apart for the Lord the Lord your God every firstborn male of your herds of flocks. Do not put the firstborn of your cows to work, and do not shear the firstborn of your sheep. Each year you and your family are to eat them in the presence of the Lord your God at the place you will choose. If an animal has a defect, is lame or blind, or has any serious flaw, you must not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. You are to eat it in your own towns. Both the ceremonially unclean and the clean may eat it as if it were a gazelle or deer, but you must not eat the blood. Pour it out on the ground like water. So the firstborn animal, firstborn male, is a offering to the Lord, but it must be perfect, and it must, like, they can't just give like a junky animal to God. They're allowed to eat the junky animals on their own, the imperfect animals in their own town, but even then they must, as we've talked about, they must pour out the blood, because they are not supposed to eat blood at all. And so they pour it out on the ground because life is in the blood. But the animal, the firstborn male animal, they bring to the temple or the tabernacle, and they are to offer it as a part of the sacrifice to the Lord. The priest and the Levites will get a portion of the animal, but then the family, the household, will also eat there in the tabernacle complex, in the temple complex, in a way of sharing a meal with the Lord. And so even their offering in this situation is something that they participate in. It's not just something that they give away; they also get to participate in the in those offerings. And then so that's chapter 15. Chapter 16 turns the focus to the major festivals and the pilgrimage festivals that the people are supposed to participate in every year, and starting with Passover. So in 16:1, it says, observe the month of Aviv and celebrate the Passover, the Lord your God, because in the month of Aviv, he brought you out of Egypt by night. Sacrifice as the Passover to the Lord your God an animal from your flock or herd at the place the Lord will choose as a dwelling for his name. Do not eat it with bread made with yeast, but for 7 days eat unleavened bread, the bread of affliction, because you left Egypt in haste, so that the days of your life you may remember the time of your departure from Egypt. Let no yeast be found in your possession in all your land for 7 days. Do not let any of the meat you sacrifice on the evening of the first day remain until morning. You must not sacrifice the Passover in any town the Lord your God gives you, except in the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. There you must sacrifice the Passover in the evening when the sun goes down on the anniversary of your departure from Egypt. Roast it and eat it at the place the Lord your God will choose. Then in the morning, return to your tents. For 6 days, eat unleavened bread. And on the seventh day, hold an assembly to the Lord your God and do no work. So Aviv is March and April. It's when the Passover would happen. It's following a lunar cycle, and so that's why it moves back and forth between March and April. And it's really considered the beginning of the year for the people of Israel, and it's kind of weird because the calendar for Israel actually has two New Years. So one is a religious New Year, and another one is like a harvest New Year. And so Aviv, the Passover, is one of the New Years. And so they are to go to the wherever the tabernacle is and where the temple will be in Jerusalem. That's where they're supposed to celebrate the Passover. So they're not supposed to observe Passover at home, but only in the place the Lord chooses to let his name dwell. And so, so they come with a lamb, and they make the sacrifice, and then they put the blood on the doorposts, and then they eat it in their home. The people do. They're not supposed to eat this in the temple or the tabernacle, but at home with their household. And which is interesting because these people are going to be coming to Jerusalem, and most of the people coming do not live in Jerusalem. So how they coordinate the household is, maybe a borrowed room in somebody's house. Jesus and with his disciples did not have a home in Jerusalem, and they still observe the Passover. And they're supposed to observe this by household. And here Jesus brings these people together, creating a new family of his disciples. And so he is observing this in his household, in the family of Jesus, which is kind of beautiful when you think about what Jesus has done for us in our in these kinds of festivals, like thinking about how he's creating a new thing out of an old thing. But it's all supposed to remind them of their departure from Egypt, and that's why they did not have time for the bread to rise, because they left in haste. And so that's why there is no yeast or leaven for 7 days as part of this observance as well. And there's also potentially a purification idea behind that, because they're taking a portion of the dough from the previous bread and they're working it into a new batch of dough, and that's how the leaven starts to work in. And so every year they have an opportunity to start over in case there have become any impurities in that dough. And so they cleaned out all the yeast, all the dough from their household, so that they would not be tempted to eat the yeast. And then the next one that they look festival is the Festival of Weeks, or what we also call Pentecost. Verse 9, count off 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Then celebrate the Festival of Weeks to the Lord your God by giving a free will offering in proportion to the blessing the Lord your God has given you. And rejoice before the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name. You, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, the Levites in your towns, and the foreigners, the fatherless, the widows living among you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and followed carefully these decrees. And so this is the part of the first fruits, the Pentecost. It's this early harvest of the grain that they are offering to the Lord. And it is something that it is a festival that everybody can participate in. And so they, men, women, the rich, the poor, the foreigners, they are all able to be a part of this celebration. And it is intended to be a celebration of joy, because look at what the Lord has done. Look at his provision, and let's celebrate his generosity together. And so they, as they give this offering, they are Yeah, they're celebrating God's provision. And like there's a tie in here to remember that you were slaves in Egypt. And one of the reasons why the remembering that they were slaves in Egypt is so important is because it helps them to hold on to the history of the people of Israel, but also remembering that slaves, they did not work the land for their own benefit. They worked the land for the master's benefit. But here the Lord is saying, like, I'm doing this for you. This is all for your benefit. And so before you worked hard and got nothing, but now you work hard and look at all that the Lord is giving to you. And so that's the festival of Pentecost, or festival of weeks. And when we come to the New Testament, Acts chapter 2, like it's a pilgrimage festival. And so all the people come to Jerusalem to observe the Pentecost from around the world. And it is a day of joy as the Spirit fills the disciples and they begin speaking in tongues, proclaiming the goodness of God. And people are confused and ask, what is going on? And Peter preaches, gives the gospel message, tying scripture to what Jesus has done and his death and resurrection. And then it calls people to repent, and 3,000 people are baptized that day. That is a joyous day. That is the early harvest for the church. And it is a beautiful thing that the Lord has done. But looking at this reminder that this is a festival that you should invite the foreigner to observe and celebrate with you. And so the transformation of language as being something that could keep people separated here at Pentecost, language becomes a something that brings people together as the Lord gives them the ability to speak in the languages of the people. It's awesome. It's awesome. And then even further back, go look at Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel, where that is where the nations are divided and spread out, and it's because of the confusion of tongues and languages. And then at Pentecost, there's a reversal of Babel, and the people are able to hear the praises of God in our own language. It's beautiful, beautiful thing. And so, yeah, the next one is Feast of Tabernacles. And this is in verse 13. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days, celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and at the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. And so tabernacles is happens in the fall, usually September time, and the people are to build booths or tabernacles, and they live in the tabernacles for a week, and then they are remembering God's provision for them while they were in the wilderness. And this is also the other side of the harvest. And so they bring an offering to the Lord at tabernacles as well, which is the fall harvest time. And it's an offering in proportion to what the Lord has blessed them with. And so they are, if they had a good year, then their offering will be bigger. If they had a hard year, the offering will be smaller, but it will be in proportion. And so that's one of the really, really cool things about the way the Lord commands the people to be generous. Is it's not a flat expense for everybody. It's a percentage, and so there's different expectations for different people based on what they were able to do. But it's all the same expectation because it's a percentage for all. So, and again, this is another joyful celebration for the people as they come together to celebrate all of God's provision for them. And so these festivals, these pilgrimage festivals, all the festivals of the people of Israel are tied to God's saving work, his redeeming work, and his providing work And so they are intended to be a celebration time, a time of joy, tied to their history. And if they don't do these kinds of things, the fear is that they would forget all that the Lord has done. And as you look through, again, if you look into the historical books, First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles, you see that they did not do a very good job at remembering these kinds of commands. King Josiah, as he's reading the law, is like, oh, we're not doing any of this. We should get back to doing these things. Hezekiah brought great reform to the nation as they come back to the law. And so this is one of those things that the people were not very good at remembering to do. These festivals were a tremendous disruption to day-to-day life. And so, they probably just were like, it's not that big a deal this year. But for God, it is a big deal. He wants his people to celebrate and to remember his goodness. And one of the ways that they could do that is by establishing good leaders to help them stay focused on what God is calling them to do. And that's what we get into in this next section, in talking about judges in verse 18. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God has given you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, so this is something that we first get an indication of in Exodus, when Moses' father-in-law comes and he sees that Moses is listening to every person's complaints. And Jethro, his father-in-law, says, what you're doing is not good. You need to appoint people to help carry the load here. And so here we see this principle again repeated, essentially. Towns and areas are going to have officials that will settle disputes, and these are judges. And the judge is just supposed to be fair and to seek justice and only justice. And justice is based on God's standards. It is about making sure it's about setting things right. And the law, as we said months ago, in the law there is no concept of prison. It's about restoration. It's restorative justice throughout the Old Testament, not just punishment. And so the judge is not supposed to be somebody who is prone to taking a bribe or to favoritism. And one of the interesting things as I was reading this is do not show partiality. And the phrasing there in the original language is do not know faces, essentially. Like, don't be like, oh, I know that guy, I'll treat him better than the other guy. Treat everybody the same. Everybody, rich, poor, foreigner, widow, orphan, they're all to be treated fairly and to be given the justice based on the Lord's standard of justice. And so the righteousness and justice are sometimes tied together. It is about setting things right. And the judge also is to make just decisions about issues of how people are worshiping the Lord, because this is important. One of the dangers for the people of Israel is that they would drift away from covenant faithfulness to the Lord. And that's what the next section is, verse 21. Do not set up any wooden Asherah pole beside the altar you build to the Lord your God, and do not erect a sacred stone, for these the Lord your God hates. Do not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep that has any defect or flaw in it, for that would be detestable to him. If a man or woman living among you in one of the towns the Lord gives you is found doing evil in the eyes of the Lord your God in violation of his covenant, and contrary to my command, has worshipped other gods, bowing down to them or to the sun or the moon or the stars in the sky, and this has been brought to your attention, then you must investigate it thoroughly. If it is true and it has been proved that this detestable thing has been done in Israel, take the man or woman who has done this evil deed to your city gate and stone that person to death. On the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a person is to be put to death, but no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. The hands of the witnesses must be the first in putting that person to death, and then the hands of all the people. You must purge the evil from among you. So the first part of this, worshiping other gods, setting up Asherah poles or sacred stones. That's Asherah is a deity. It's basically a building a tree of sorts, is the Asherah pole that you would make your sacrifices under. And then the sacred stone is a way that they would worship Baal in their region, in the Canaanite region. And both are detestable to the Lord. And the temptation is they build a temple and they're like, well, we should bring these other regional gods into this whole thing. And the Lord says, no, do not do that. And the other side then is if they are, well, we're just going to worship how we want in our own town, and maybe even set up some of these sacred stones and Asherah poles here because that's cool. And the Lord is again saying it is not cool, it is bad. And so if this is known to be happening, then this is where the judges come in, is they need to recognize, they need to discern, is this going on? And so they would hear witnesses. If they could prove that this was happening, then idolatry, worshiping these other gods in any way they see fit, was a capital offense, and they were to be executed by stoning. And the first people, well, let me back up. In order to be sentenced to death, you have to have 2 to 3 witnesses. And those witnesses need to be telling the truth. This is one of the 10 commandments. Do not bear false witness. And so one person could say something like, oh yeah, this guy, he's totally worshiping Baal over here. And that guy could be looking at this, the person he's accusing, looking at their property and saying, I would really like some of their property. If I can get him out of the picture, then that'd be great. So one person cannot be enough to sentence somebody to death. But if there are 2 or 3 witnesses, this is then where it could potentially be a death sentence. But these witnesses, they need to know that they know that they know. They have to be certain, because if this person is found guilty, the witnesses are the first to throw the stones, and then the rest of the community then also throws the stones. And so stoning is a community event, and it is important to remember that sin affects everybody. Sin breaks your relationships with God, your relationship with creation, your relationship with other people. And so this kind of idolatry is something that affects the community, and that is why the community is brought into the execution. It is not because the people should have a bloodlust to kill people. That it should be a heavy decision to do this, and you have to know that you know that you know. Now, go to John chapter 8 and flip there in your mind. Jesus is in the temple complex in Jerusalem, I think, and they bring to him a woman caught in the act of adultery. And Jesus, they say the law says we can stone her, and so Jesus starts drawing in the sand, and then they're like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, whoever has the first, whoever is without sin, let them throw the first stone." And so he's calling into question their role as witnesses, partly because it's like, you know, your own imperfections, and you know your own brokenness, and do you really want the community to do this to you? It's a heavy thing. It's a heavy thing. And so, you know, Jesus says, you know, they all leave, dropping their stones. And he goes to the woman's like, where are your accusers? I mean, it's a beautiful story, but like, here we have the community trying to put Jesus in a trap more than they're trying to ensure righteousness in the community. And Jesus isn't going to play those games. He's not going to fall into their trap. And so, yeah, let's I keep going here. Sorry. Oh, we went into 17. Verse 8. Continuing on with this, law courts, judges, right worship. These are all part of the judge's role, and then also law courts to establish a greater system here from town to region to all the way up to Jerusalem. If cases come before your courts that are too difficult for you to judge, whether bloodshed, lawsuits, or assaults, take them to the place the Lord your God will choose. Go to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office at the time. Inquire of them, and they will give you the verdict. You must act according to the decisions they give you at the place the Lord your Lord will choose. Be careful to do everything they instruct you to do. Act according to whatever they teach you and the decisions they give you. Do not turn aside from what they tell you, to the right or to the left. Anyone who shows contempt for the judge or for the priest who stand ministering there to the Lord your God is to be put to death. You must purge the evil from Israel. All the people will hear and be afraid. It will not be contemptuous again. So, so if your town is like, we don't know what to do with this situation, then there's, much like our court system in America, there's a higher level. And so like you get all the way up to the Supreme Court, like that is the final court in the land, right? And so the same is true here in the way the Lord is structuring the people of Israel. The highest court in the land is going to be the high priest and the judge, who are working in concerts, essentially, in the land, in the area that the Lord will choose, which will be Jerusalem. And so they are to bring these difficult cases before the Lord there, and they do whatever the high priest and the judge says. Like, you cannot appeal beyond them. And so this is a if it is too difficult and there's no clear answer for the high priest and the judge, that is when they might use the Urim and the Thummim, the two basically like stones that the high priest has in the pouch in the ephod, that there's a white stone and a black stone maybe, and like they reach in and they pull out a stone. White would be like not guilty, the black stone would be guilty, something like that. So that's the court system. The king then is in verse 14. When you enter the land your God is giving you, and you have taken possession of it and settled in it, and you say, let us set a king over us like all the nations around us, be sure to appoint over you a king the Lord your God chooses. He must be from among your fellow Israelites. Do not place a foreigner over you, one who is not an Israelite. The king, moreover, must not acquire a great number of horses for himself, or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them. For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. He must not accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. When he takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the Levitical priests. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully in the words of this law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his fellow Israelites, and turn from the law to the right or to the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. Now, the assumption for most of the Pentateuch so far is that God's going to be king, right? And so here there's an allowance for a king that is in the law. And even here, though, the Lord says, when you get into the land and you're like, we want to be like other nations and have a king, there's a little bit of a disappointment tone here in the Lord. Like, I don't want this for you, but you're going to want it. And so what should you do when you have the king? And so they have to be an Israelite, don't have a foreigner. But then also they give these stipulations, like, don't acquire a large army, don't acquire, because you might think it's your strength that is sustaining the nation. Don't acquire many wives, and those wives would usually be a political alliance marriage, because then you are tied to other nations in a way that is not honoring the Lord. And don't acquire great wealth, because then you might think, well, I could just buy myself out of this problem. And so these three things the Lord is saying, don't do them. And there is one person in particular in the Old Testament who did all of these things, and that's Solomon. And so he was the wisest king, right? He wrote the book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon. He wrote these great wisdom works. People from around the world were amazed by his wisdom. The Queen of Sheba came and asked him all kinds of questions. Like, he is an impressively smart person, but he's also doing all the things that the law here says don't do, which is difficult to get our brain around, right? But what happened with Solomon is all these wives, they pulled his heart away from the Lord. And so, like here in Deuteronomy, there is great wisdom for the future. Part of the way that the Lord is calling the king to stay faithful then is to say, like, he needs to copy out the whole book of Deuteronomy and read it and reflect on it and recognize God's design for the people, this way of life and path of life that God is providing. And so that would be a protection, a defense. Unfortunately, we don't have any real recognition that this is actually happening. And Josiah, it says when the book of the law was brought to him, he was marveling at it. He's like, this is really great stuff. We should get back to this, because they hadn't been doing it. And it was already, years and years after, the Lord had begun the process of discipline. So, yeah. So how does the king supposed to maintain right relationship? Keep his heart tied to the word of the Lord and the law of the Lord. But then also the priests are supposed to be a part of keeping the people focused on God's word. And so the last chapter we're going to look at is going to look at the priests and then prophets, and false prophets in particular, because or both, but we're going to look at false prophets and then the true prophets, create a contrast. And so chapter 18, the Levitical priests, indeed the whole tribe of Levi, are to have no allotment or inheritance with Israel. They shall live on the food offerings presented to the Lord, for that is their inheritance. They shall have no inheritance among their fellow Israelites. The Lord is their inheritance, as he promised them. This is the share due to the priests from the people who sacrifice a bull or a sheep, the shoulder, the internal organs, and the meat from the head. You are to give them the first fruits of your grains, new wine, olive oil, and the first wool from the shearing of your sheep. For the Lord your God has chosen them and their descendants out of all of your tribes to stand and minister in the Lord's name always. If a Levite moves from one of your towns anywhere in Israel where he is living and comes in all earnestness to the place the Lord will choose, he may minister in the name of the Lord his God, like all his fellow Levites who serve there in the presence of the Lord. He is to share equally in their benefits, even though he has received money from the sale of family possessions. And so this is saying the Levites are here to help you stay focused on the word of God and to worship God properly. And they're scattered throughout the country because they are representatives of the Lord. And because they're scattered all throughout the country, instead of their tribe being localized in one place, they do not have large tracts of land to produce their own crops and raise large flocks. And so this is why their inheritance is part of the sacrificial system. They receive a portion of this sacrifice for them and for their families. And so we've gone over that with the Leviticus and Numbers laws. And so that's what the Lord is reminding them here. But then let's say a Levite moves from one town to go serve in the temple complex in the future, right? And so they're allowed to do that. They can go and serve with all the other Levites who are at the temple, and expect to still be able to have a portion of those offerings to take care of the priest there while he's serving in the temple. So that's part of what the priests are doing. One of the reasons why the Lord calls the people back to Jerusalem to do these sacrifices and these offerings, so that they do not fall into a habit of pursuing the regional gods of the Canaanites. And that's one of the challenges that is addressed in verse 9. When you enter the land the Lord your God has given you, do not learn to imitate the detestable ways of the nations there. Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Because of the same detestable practices, the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you. You must be blameless before the Lord your God. Now, these different kinds of occult practices were probably used as a way to discern the will of God, or the will of the deity. And so, because all the Canaanites are all around and they've got their practices, then it would have been easy to see, like, well, it's working for those guys, so let's try this. That was the temptation. And so they should not do this. And if they do, there are consequences, which that's one of the reasons what the death penalty is for, practicing any of these different kinds of detestable practices, because the Lord wants you to be blameless. But instead of those practices, we should trust the Lord and his messengers. And so when the people veer off track, then the Lord raises up prophets, and the prophets are called to call them back into right relationship with him. And so all in verse 14, and this is the last section we're going to look at today, the nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. For this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when he said, let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see his great fire anymore, or we will die. The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their fellow Israelites, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will tell them everything I command him. I myself will call to account anyone who does not listen to my words that the prophet speaks in my name. But a prophet who presumes to speak in my name anything I have not commanded, or a prophet who speaks in the name of other gods, is to be put to death. You may say to yourself, how can we know when a message has not been spoken by the Lord? If what a prophet proclaims in the name of the Lord does not take place or come true, that is a message the Lord has not spoken. That prophet has spoken presumptuously. So do not be alarmed. And so instead of pursuing the occult practices, the divination, the human sacrifice that is happening around them in the Canaanite religions, the Lord is saying, if you want to hear from God, you need to hear from God's messenger. And so he will raise up a prophet like Moses. And so there's a couple understandings of what does that a prophet like me mean. The first is that there will be a succession of prophets, people who are used by God to proclaim God's truth to God's people. And that's what we see in the Old Testament. There are prophets throughout their history. And sometimes there are many prophets, and sometimes there are a few prophets. But all the prophets share the same characteristic. They are calling the people back to right relationship with the Lord. And so the prophets are not trying to divine the will of God through reading tea leaves or entrails from animals, or any of those different occult practices that were mentioned earlier. They're not trying to practice magic. They're not doing any of those things. Instead, they are hearing from the Lord and carried along by the Spirit and proclaiming God's truth to God's people. And so we see that progression of prophets throughout the Old Testament. But at the end of what we call the Old Testament, Malachi is the last prophet, and there's about 400 years where we see no real prophetic voice in the people of Israel. And so during that time, which we call the intertestamental period, the expectations of the Messiah began to develop in different ways. So this is where they recognize, like, we were promised a king in the line of David, and we are waiting for that king. We see in Moses a prophet like him that is to come, and we believe that the Messiah will be that prophet. There's also the expectation that there will be a purification of the priesthood, and the Messiah will be that perfect priest. So how will this all come to pass? And so they're looking for all of these elements, a prophet, a priest, and a king, in the messianic expectation. So by the time Jesus comes along, one of the questions they ask him in John's gospel is, are you the prophet? And that they're referring back to Deuteronomy 18. They say, are you the one that Moses talked about? Even though the interpretive understanding of that passage is there will be prophets that, if you veer off track, the prophet will call you back. There will be those, and that happened, but they're longing for a prophet now in Jesus' time of his ministry to call them back to right relationship with God. And that is what Jesus does. Now, if a prophet claims to speak for God, then there was earlier, they were told, like, if anybody says, like, we should go and follow after those gods, do not listen to them. They're a false prophet. They should be put to death. And here, even now, the Lord is saying, like, what if somebody says, here's the thing that is, the Lord says, and it will come to pass, and it doesn't come to pass. The Lord says, they're bearing false witness against me as God, essentially. So they should be put to death as well. And so being a prophet is not something that was like, oh, I'll be a prophet for a little bit. No, it was a serious call for the people of Israel. And the true prophets, one of the things we see throughout their ministries is they didn't really want to do it. They knew the risk, and they wanted to. They knew it was dangerous, and so so the priesthood, the king, the prophet, and like these three major figures in the Old Testament, they're all in this section of Deuteronomy. And this is one of my favorite parts of Deuteronomy, is going through these reminders of what the king's supposed to do, what the priests are supposed to do, what the prophet is supposed to do, because they are such monumental figures in the Old Testament, and also gives us a picture of how Jesus fulfills these roles in his ministry as well. So any questions on Deuteronomy 15 through 18? Any thoughts or questions? I'd love to hear from you. No?
Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Sandy?
Yeah. Do we have prophets today? And who?
What?
I know there's about prophets, but do we have what God would consider a prophet for today's world? Or is that part of the spiritual gifts?
What we see in Corinthians, there are prophets mentioned in the spiritual gifts. Right. And Paul gives instructions to the prophets on how they should carry on their ministry in an orderly way. And so there are traditions in the church that believe that all the spiritual gifts ended after the completion of the New Testament. Our tradition does not hold to that. That view is called cessationism. We are a continuationism, I think is what it's called. But we affirm the spiritual gifts. We affirm that there are prophets. Is there one prophet speaking for all of Christendom? No. I don't see that. And so there are prophets, because Joel 2 says, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your old men and your young men shall dream dreams, and they shall prophesy. And so there's a kind of democratization of the gifts of the Spirit, that there's more, the Spirit's moving in more people in the prophetic gifts. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
But let me give you a caveat here. There are a lot of people who claim to be prophets who are not. And that is the greater danger. And like they
Let's stone them.
There are moments in my life where I'm like,
sorry, Jason.
I would be on board with that, but I'm also committed to a path of peace, recognizing that Jesus is the one who is the ultimate judge. And so I'm not going to do the stoning work. But yeah, it is there are plenty of people who are presuming to speak for the Lord, but what they're saying is not in line with scripture.
With the rules. Yeah.
Well, yeah, with just what God has already said. Like they're like, yeah. And so, yeah, it just, if you ever have a question, if you ever come across something where somebody is claiming to be a prophet,
Where's your scripture?
yeah, like show me, back this up with what the Bible says, and let's talk about that. If it is clearly like, if they are predicting specific things on specific days and that doesn't come to pass, remind them, hey, you said this and it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, I don't think you're a prophet. And one of the challenges now is there are people who are saying, well, they're learning how to use the spiritual gifts. And it's like, well, then they should stop like being so bold and public with it, because it's creating greater confusion and pain for the body of Christ. And so, for example, there are people in the last year who claim to be prophets on YouTube, who prophesied that the former President Trump would be reinstated to be the president in August.
They weren't Trump, they weren't.
And it is now November. So that didn't happen, right? But there are those very people will then say, like, well, maybe the days are wrong. Well, it's like, you are claiming to speak with certainty for the Lord, and you are wrong.
Yeah.
Like we have to be really mindful of those things and watch out for that. So, not to be on a bandwagon, I'm just saying, like, that is the most recent, most dangerous abuse of the role of the prophet that makes me most concerned for the church in America, because people are confused. So, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Bob, you're very tickled over there. What's happening?
Yeah, yes. We'll leave it at that.
All right. Yeah, it's been an interesting little while. As a church person watching, like I really do want the best for the church, and I want us to be living peaceful and quiet lives with the world around us. And there are things that just are happening lately that just grieve me, because it's like, that's not helping the cause of Christ. And so, but
you preach it.
well, I'll do what I can. So
yes.
Yeah.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Bob.
Glad you're back. Glad you guys did what you did, but I missed Bible study a lot last week, so I for sure didn't want to miss it tonight.
Yeah, well, I always miss when we're out of rhythms a little bit, and so it's always good to get back into it. So yeah, I'm glad you guys could all join tonight, even though it's a lower crowd. Thanksgiving kind of messes some things up. I know some folks are traveling, but yeah, I just want you all to know tomorrow is a day of joy. And so when we look at the festival of Pentecost and Tabernacles, I want to encourage you, like, they're supposed to do like a wave offering to the Lord to say, God, you're so good and so wonderful. And so maybe tomorrow at some point, just hold up that drum leg and say, Lord, you are so good. We only have the one day dedicated to Thanksgiving, and for the people of Israel, they had multiple days throughout the year where they had these festivals that are intended to remind them of God's faithfulness and his provision. And so, yeah, so someday if you do that, send me a picture as you're like waving the drumstick. That'll make me happy. So, and I will be grateful. So, all right, but I'll let you guys go because it is late and it is a yeah. I want you to get all the rest you need to eat all the turkey you can. So,
You have a good day also.
all right, you
Right.
have a great one, everybody. God
Happy
bless.
Thanksgiving, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving.
All of you too.
All right, bye.